among developing nations. From education to healthcare, agriculture to infrastructure, Indonesia has shared its expertise, empowering other nations to thrive. By participating in SSTC, Indonesia demonstrates the power of shared knowledge and mutual assistance, reinforcing our commitment to building a more equitable and connected world. As a co-chair representing dual-role countries in Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, GPEDC, Indonesia has been actively promoting principles of effective development, cooperation at the global and national level. These principles including to ensure the country ownership, focusing on results, inclusive partnerships, as well as transparency and mutual accountability. Indonesia's leadership in GPEDC reflects our commitment to effective development cooperation as a key in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and creating a better future for all. Through the High-Level Forum on Multi-Stakeholder Partnership, Indonesia will continue to champion inclusive, innovative, and effective partnerships that deliver real impact. In this pivotal role, Indonesia will guide global discussions and catalyze collaborative action to ensure that development cooperation becomes a beacon of hope for all nations. Indonesia's journey is one of collaboration, leadership, and progress. Together with the world, we will continue to build a future where development knows no boundaries. Indonesia, a nation of remarkable diversity, strength, and vision, stands at the crossroads of global development. As a committed global partner, Indonesia has played a significant role in shaping the future of international cooperation. Through the High-Level Forum on Multi-Stakeholder Partnership, HLF MSP, Indonesia has been a leading voice in advocating for inclusive partnerships. This forum brings together governments, civil society, the private sector, and international organizations working hand in hand to tackle the world's most pressing development challenges. Indonesia has championed the importance of collaboration, ensuring that no one is left behind in the pursuit of sustainable development. Our nation's leadership in HLF MSP exemplifies our dedication to fostering dialogue and creating lasting solutions through stronger South-South and Triangular Cooperation, SSTC, sustainable economy, and innovative financing. In parallel, Indonesia's role in SSTC has set a benchmark for solidarity among developing nations. From education to healthcare, agriculture to infrastructure, Indonesia has shared its expertise, empowering other nations to thrive. By participating in SSTC, Indonesia demonstrates the power of shared knowledge and mutual assistance, reinforcing our commitment to building a more equitable and connected world. As a co-chair representing dual-role countries in Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, GPEDC, Indonesia has been actively promoting principles of effective development, cooperation at the global and national level. These principles including to ensure the country ownership, focusing on results, inclusive partnerships, as well as transparency and mutual accountability. Indonesia's leadership in GPEDC reflects our commitment to effective development cooperation as a key in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and creating a better future for all. Through the High-Level Forum on Multi-Stakeholder Partnership, Indonesia will continue to champion inclusive, innovative, and effective partnerships that deliver real impact. In this pivotal role, Indonesia will guide global discussions and catalyze collaborative action to ensure that development cooperation becomes a beacon of hope for all nations. in HLF MSP exemplifies our dedication to fostering dialogue and creating lasting solutions through stronger South-South and Triangular Cooperation (SSTC), sustainable economy, and innovative financing. In parallel, Indonesia's
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the third thematic parallel session, Connecting the South, Enhancing Logistic Connectivity to Support Trade in Developing Countries. I am Valerina Daniel, your Master of Ceremony. To start this session, we would like to kindly invite Her Excellency, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UN Trade and Development, to deliver her speech. Please welcome to the stage Her Excellency, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan.
Hello, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you so much for being here for this high-level panel. And I want to greet all the panelists, the ministers, the representatives of international organizations and the development banks, and the moderator, that you have really a very high-quality panel, so I am sure you will enjoy it. And hello also to all of you, all protocol observed. Thank you for having me here. It is an honor to participate in this very important session. In today's interconnected world, efficient and reliable logistic systems are the backbone of global trade and economic development. For far too long, we have taken for granted the seamless flow of goods and the timely delivery of essentials, all of which hinge on the strength of our supply chains. But health, geopolitical and climate change shocks like the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the attacks on the Red Sea, and the drought of the Panama Canal have shattered this complacency. We have seen that when supply chains falter, it's not just businesses that suffer, it's livelihoods that are threatened, communities that are disrupted, and aspirations that are crushed. Developing countries in particular are disproportionately vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. And within the developing countries group, small island developing states, the SEADs, and landlocked developing states, the LLDCs, suffer the most, since they face, on average, transport costs that are between 32 and 35% higher than the global median. According to our research, higher maritime costs have 5 times the impact on inflation in seats than in the rest of the world. 5 times, 500%. Indonesia knows very well what I am talking about. With more than 18,000 islands, many inhabitants of this archipelago state experience the consequences of higher prices in products they need for daily consumption. This stark reality underscores the urgency of improving the resilience, the inclusiveness, and the sustainability of our global supply chains. This past May, UNCTAD, together with the government of Barbados, hosted the first ever UN high-level global supply chain forum to provide concrete answers to this question. And we left the forum with 3 key learnings that I want to share with you. Based on these 3 words: inclusivity, sustainability, and resilience. On inclusivity, we need to innovate to find solutions to lower the cost faced by different countries and geographies in their connectivity and trade activities. But we need to also make all effort to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises stand a fighting chance to share the benefits of trade in a way that is fair for all, in particular for women-owned businesses and youth entrepreneurs. In this sense, the health of our chains must be measured not only by how long they are globally, but also by how deep they are locally. We must ask, where do our supply chains start? Do they start at the nickel mine or the cotton farm to then take the high road to port and then to sea? Or do our chains start at the local schoolyard where children receive healthy meals from locally produced ingredients? Do they start with the skilled artisan whose products find buyers worldwide? Do they empower women to take their rightful place in the economy? This is particularly important for a country like Indonesia, where almost 8% of the GDP is produced by the creative economy, with a huge potential for growth. This is the essence of inclusive supply chains that build communities from the ground up, ensuring structural transformation, productive diversification, and fighting back against commodity dependence. This was a very important part of our discussion yesterday, how to diversify the economy, how to add value, and how to take advantage of the opportunity that many developing countries have with their reserves of critical minerals for the energy transition and for the digital transition. But as said before, inclusivity also means ensuring that all countries, regardless of their size or economic status, have a voice in shaping global supply chains. Do our current trade agreements prioritize the need of the developing countries? Are we doing enough to support small island states and landlocked countries in accessing global markets? And perhaps most importantly, are we building supply chains that foster collaboration and share prosperity? Or are we simply perpetuating a system of winners and losers? This is even more important today because today we see a rise in protectionism. Industrial policy is back. We see big countries integrating vertically their exports, which can really impact supply chains and the possibility of the decentralization of international economics. All of these questions are key for the healthy development of our nations and the global economy. Our sustainability, the global supply chains we want to build, must be ones where ports go paperless, where ships use sustainable fuels based on common standards agreed at the International Maritime Organization, where trade is digital, with the help, I hope, of the UN Trade and Development and our programs to digitalize the customs systems. We have digitalized more than 100 countries' digital customs systems already. And we need also, with that, supply chains that are green from the start. Shipping, as we will probably hear from the representative here, represents 3% of all greenhouse gas emissions, a number we must bring down through a decisive transition to sustainable maritime fuels. We are working hand in hand with the International Maritime Organization on this. I know Indonesia is also doing its part by partnering with other Asian countries and exploring biofuel options and reducing the carbon print of its shipping industry. Indonesia is also embracing the digital economy. Our organization, UNCTAD, is ready to support the country in developing a stronger and more efficient e-commerce strategy through the e-trade readiness assessment that we will start next year. Lastly, on resilience. The global supply chains we want to build must be strong, flexible, and adaptable enough that when a drought strikes a great canal like the Panama Canal, when a new conflict reroutes shipping routes like in the Red Sea, or when a new pandemic forces us to rethink production and consumption, our people don't suffer needlessly. And countries don't lose their development gains. You know that during the COVID pandemic, countries in 1 year lost 10 years of improvements in poverty and inequality. So when we have that kind of result and impact, is because we were calling development probably something that wasn't, and because we didn't have the resilience to really absorb the shocks. So what that means is that we have to diversify suppliers and production hubs, promoting regional trade, and developing infrastructure, sustainable infrastructures that open markets within countries themselves. But all that needs financing, needs resources, needs investment, especially on climate adaptation of many of the infrastructure. And that's why the presence here of the multilateral banks is so important, and development banks is so important. In 2022, just to give you an indicator, total climate finance was around $116 billion, of which only $32 billion was for adaptation. These numbers are a minute fraction of what is needed. Adaptation costs in developing countries are 10 to 18 times greater than current finance flows. So closing these gaps is one of the best investments we can do, because we know that the return to investment is $4 for every dollar invested. So we need to make the case that this is a smart investment. Lastly, a big component of building resilience is going digital. According to our research, the digital era is an unprecedented opportunity for developing country supply chains. Digital trade allows these countries to transcend the barriers of their geography, remoteness, access global markets seamlessly, and most importantly, diversify their economies through digitally delivered service exports, a sector that is growing at a very rapid pace. Between 2010 and 2022, the global export value of digitally delivered services grew twofold, from 1.8 to 3.9 trillion US dollars. So harnessing the full potential of digital services demands addressing the disparities in digital infrastructure, which is key. But their opportunities are clearly there. So, dear Excellencies, let's seize the pivotal moment to push for a collective effort from all stakeholders to build sustainable, inclusive, and resilient supply chains. Let us work together to ensure that trade is not just a driver of economic growth, but also a force for inclusion, leaving no one behind. The time for action is now, and you have the opportunity in this discussion to present many of the solutions that we need to make it a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Please remain on stage for a photo session. To join on stage for the photo session, I would like to invite Mr. Thomas Mangieri, Policy Specialist Panel, Quadrant Strategies, Mr. Alvin Botas, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Pot Bunnak, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Planning, Kingdom of Cambodia, Bapak Yoki Firnandi, CEO PT Pertamina International Shipping, Mr. Tan Ho Soon, Assistant Chief Executive, Corporate and Strategy, Chief Risk Officer, Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, Ms. Sila Lakatos, Senior Economist of the World Bank, Mr. Amer Bukvich, Director of Islamic Development Bank Regional Hub, Indonesia. on my count. 3, 2, 1. One more time. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, you may return to your seat. To moderator and all panelists, please remain on stage and take your respective seats. Ladies and gentlemen, to start the thematic session, I would like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Thomas Mangieri, Policy Specialist Panel, Quadrant Strategies. More than 3 years studying and working in international affairs and sustainability policy. Graduated summa cum laude with highest distinction from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. Quadrant Strategies is a research-driven consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. that serves as a trusted advisor to senior executives at Fortune 500 companies and political leaders around the world. Mr. Mangieri is a member of Policy Specialist Panel engaged in polls, interviews, and focus groups on various current affairs issues in business and politics. Mr. Thomas Mangieri, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you and good afternoon. Welcome, selamat datang to everyone. Welcome to the thematic session on connecting the South, enhancing logistics connectivity to support trade in developing countries. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Thomas Mangieri. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to serve as your moderator for this session. It's an honor. At the top, I'd like to just thank the Ministry of National Development Planning for the kind invitation and for organizing this important forum on exploring the power of multi-stakeholder partnerships for transformative change. A major theme of the forum is to unlock the latent potential of developing countries and emerging economies in the Global South. In this session, we will discuss trade and trade among the Global South. More specifically, though, we will consider how efforts of stakeholders, including international organizations, multilateral development banks, governments, private sector, and others, can work in partnership to improve logistics connectivity with the goal to unlock the hidden potential of increased trade. Primarily, we will focus on maritime transport due to its massive scale. Over 80% of global merchandise trade by volume is shipped by sea transport. This fact makes seaports essential to global trade and the global economy. And we have a representative of a successful seaport here today to discuss this key part of logistics connectivity, Mr. Tan. When we drill down into the shipping sector, we see some interesting details suggesting the unlocked potential of the Global South. For example, according to UNCTAD data, developing countries hold a majority share of merchant vessels globally, around 60%. On the other hand, developed countries hold only a third of such vessels, about 32%. The remainder is held by least developed countries, around 6.4%. However, despite holding a majority share of vessels, developing countries are not maximizing this position, this strong position, due to poor logistics performance in part. According to the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index 2023, developed countries hold most of the top spots in logistics performance, while most developing countries and LDCs fall below the 20th rank in this index, suggesting that the Global South is getting less out of its relatively larger fleet. This is just an example of the hidden potential, which may be unlocked through greater cooperation, coordination, and other support measures based on new and improved multi-stakeholder partnerships, and this is what we will get into today. We are joined by an esteemed panel to dig into the nitty-gritty of this topic and have them share their experiences and insights on how we may make progress on this important matter. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, which may not be in the order they are seated on stage. First, I'd like to introduce His Excellency, Dr. Poch Bunak, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Planning, Cambodia. With a PhD in sociology and demography, Dr. Poch devotes most of his time working on issues of population and development and formulating population-related policies, touching on many aspects of society, which I won't go into detail right now. It's a long list. He also works on demographic and socioeconomic issues of Cambodia's indigenous peoples and their community development. Dr. Bunak serves as chair and member of several national committees, too long to mention here, but you could see it online. Next, I'm pleased to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Alvin Botes, Deputy Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, South Africa. Thank you. With an academic background in management and business administration, Mr. Botes has wide experience, including a 10-year stint as provincial head of policy research and analysis for the African National Congress, Northern Cape. He served in many positions, including Youth League Provincial Treasurer of the ANC, Provincial Chairperson, and he also served as member and Deputy Provincial Secretary in the ANC Provincial Executive Committee. Thank you and welcome. Next, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Yoki Fernandi, CEO of PT Pertamina International Shipping. Mr. Fernandi has an academic background in operations and supply chain management and holds an MBA. He is credited with successfully implementing a company transformation that increased profits by 93% year over year from 2022 to 2023. So I'll be looking to him for ideas on operations and supply chain optimization. Welcome, sir. Next, we have Mr. Tan Ho Soon, Assistant Chief Executive, Corporate and Strategy, and the Chief Risk Officer for the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Mr. Tan oversees key functions of policy and strategy development, international relations, communications, finance and procurement, training and legal at the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. It's quite a full plate. He also has 2 decades of experience in civil service, and most notably, I think, in 2022, Mr. Tan was awarded the Public Administration Medal, Silver, by the President of the Republic of Singapore. Welcome, Mr. Tan. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Amer Bukvic, Director and Resident Representative at the Islamic Development Bank, Regional Hub, Indonesia. Previously, Mr. Bukvic served as Acting Director General for the Global Practice and Partnerships Directorate at ISDB, headquarters in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. In his current role, he leads the bank's product and strategy direction in the areas of public and private financing and knowledge products. So you have a lot of experience working with relationships with major development partners across every sector. It's a long list here. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Silla Lakatos, Senior Economist of the World Bank. Ms. Lakatos leads the World Bank's engagement and dialogue with the authorities in Indonesia and Timor-Leste on trade, investment, and logistics issues. Prior to the World Bank, she worked for the Chief Economist Unit of the Directorate General for Trade of the European Commission in Brussels and the U.S. International Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. Holding a PhD in International Trade and Development, I should have called you Dr. Lakatos. My apologies. Okay, so the outline of the session, we will run as follows. I'll ask each panelist 2 questions with 5 minutes to answer each question. I had a request from a few panelists just to ask both questions together. They would like to address them all in one 10-minute slot. So we'll make some adjustments accordingly. Okay, now, audience members, one last thing. Please take note of any burning questions you may have during the session to ask at the Q&A, because we will have at least 10 minutes at the end. And before I begin, I just want to remind us one final thing, kind of touching upon Ms. Greenspan's points earlier. There's 2 main objectives for our conversation today. First, we will be working toward identifying specific efforts to improve logistics connectivity, and hence improve trade itself among the Global South in a sustainable way. So that's something that's key. Second, we will consider the effectiveness of international cooperation to address gaps in logistics infrastructure development. So we're looking at the international level. We'll look at what's working, what's lacking, how we may make progress to address these gaps at the international level. Okay, with that, I'd like to direct my first question to Dr. Poch. My first question for you, sir. The first is looking at the international level, and the second question will be regional. Question 1, how can countries benefit from international cooperation, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, to enhance logistics performance? To you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to join this important session on connecting the South, enhancing logistic connectivity to support trade in developing countries. I extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers for bringing us together to discuss on how we can collectively advance logistic connectivity, a critical driver of economic growth and sustainable development. You know, logistic connectivity is essential for fostering trade, reducing costs, and promoting economic growth, particularly in developing countries like Cambodia. We face unique challenges, including infrastructure gaps, complex regulatory environments, and limited access to technology. However, these challenges also present opportunities for collaboration and innovation. International cooperation initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, have been instrumental in helping countries enhance their logistic performance. Launched in 2013, the BRI aims to promote connectivity across Asia, Europe, and Africa, fostering trade, investment in economic integration. By investing in infrastructure development, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and people-to-people connectivity, the BRI provides a comprehensive framework for countries to enhance their logistic networks. Cambodia has greatly benefited from its active participation in the BRI. We have been able to implement several key infrastructure projects, including the development of transport infrastructure, improvements in port facilities, and advancements in communication networks. These projects have significantly enhanced our logistic capabilities, reducing trade costs, and improving access to regional and global markets. For example, Cambodia and China have collaborated on the construction of the Phnom Penh-Sihanoukville Expressway, which has greatly improved the connectivity between our capital and one of our economic zones. This project not only facilitates smoother and faster movement of goods, but also enhances Cambodia's attractiveness as a trade and investment destination. Cambodia has also been an active member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which provides crucial financing for infrastructure projects in Asia. As of September 2023, Cambodia has had 7 projects, including initiatives to improve irrigation, strengthen health infrastructure, and develop the fiber optic communication network. These projects are crucial for enhancing our logistic performance and supporting our broader development goals. To sum up, enhancing logistic connectivity is essential for supporting trade and economic development in developing countries. International cooperation frameworks such as the Belt and Road Initiative provides valuable opportunity for countries to enhance their logistic performance, reduce trade costs, and foster economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Poch. Yeah, you mentioned a number of major factors there. For regulatory environments, for example, that could be a slow-moving factor, but you mentioned BRI as a framework that helps in that regard. I'd like to turn to another question here. Now this is in the regional, so we're talking about the ASEAN level here. Regionalism is something, as we all know, is emerging in the recent years. Considering the Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity 2025, to achieve a seamlessly and comprehensively connected and integrated ASEAN, what role do you see Cambodia playing in the region to help in that initiative?
Thank you for the question. Cambodia is also deeply committed in regional integration through the Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity Impact 2025. Cambodia used this channel to enhance its competitiveness in enabling greater economic opportunities. In the region, Cambodia plays a vital role. We are strategically positioned at the heart of ASEAN, serving as a bridge between the region's mainland and maritime areas. This position allows us to facilitate trade flows and enhance connectivity among ASEAN member states. Under the Impact 2025, Cambodia has focused on several key areas. We have worked closely with our ASEAN neighbors to build transport infrastructure that link our countries, streamline custom procedures to facilitate trade, to enhance our logistic networks to reduce costs and improve efficiency. For instance, the construction of the Phnom Penh-Ho Chi Minh City Expressway is a testament to our commitment to regional connectivity. This project, once completed, will significantly reduce travel time and transportation costs between Cambodia and Vietnam, boosting trade and investment between our two countries and the broader ASEAN region. Recently, the Royal Government of Cambodia has launched a comprehensive master plan on Cambodia intermodal transport and logistics system 2023-2033 that aligns significantly with Impact 2025 to enhance connectivity and intertwine the country's intermodal transport and logistics system, promoting national economic growth and sustainable development. The Cambodian Master Plan explicitly aims to support and contribute to ASEAN connectivity by integrating the regional initiatives like highway networks, Mekong sub-region economic corridors, and the Greater Mekong sub-region transport strategies. A number of development and infrastructure projects under the Cambodian Master Plan includes constructing expressways and improving major transport hubs, service capability of logistics centers, and the national single window system, to name a few. Therefore, Cambodia's comprehensive master plan on intermodal transport and logistics systems is closely interlinked with Impact 2025. Cambodia remains committed to working with our international partners to enhance our logistic networks and support regional and global connectivity. We believe that by strengthening our collaboration, sharing best practices, and investing in sustainable infrastructure, we can overcome our shared challenges and build a more connected, prosperous future for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Poch. Just mindful of time here. And you mentioned a number of interesting things, thinking of Cambodia as a bridge. Mentioned Vietnam specifically and the connections there. Maybe we have time to talk about that more later. There might be some interesting details. The intermodal transport systems, I'd like to get more info on that, maybe in the Q&A period. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Botes for an African perspective. Mr. Botes, how does South Africa perceive its potential as a leading trade hub in the region? And what key areas need improvement? Maybe even what's the low-hanging fruit?
Thank you very much, Thomas, and ladies and gentlemen. South Africa obviously plays a pivotal role in Africa's economic landscape due to our strategic location, significant economic output, and growing investments. With a GDP of approximately $430 billion as of 2023, South Africa accounts for approximately 20% of Africa's total GDP, establishing itself as both the biggest economy and the most industrious economy on the African continent. We are obviously a major industrial hub, contributing substantially to Africa's manufacturing sector, including steel, chemicals, and automotives. And we produce approximately 30% of the entire Africa's vehicles. Our logistical architecture encapsulates, for example, 144 airports, 8 seaports, 2 of the world's top container ports, and 2 of the world's largest dry bulk ports. We have obviously significant investments by G7 nations, by the BRICS partners, by the ASEAN group of companies, and I think we present a bankable opportunity for businessmen and women of Indonesia through the ASEAN group of countries to deeply invest and enhance our bilateral economic cooperation. For example, this year alone, we had Volkswagen that have made a pivotal investment of 4 billion rand in South Africa in one of the automotive plants. And our performance as the trade hub of Africa is further underscored by the Port of Durban, who presents itself as the busiest port in the entirety of Africa, which handles 60% of Africa's container traffic. We are, of course, ladies and gentlemen, also as South Africa, Africa's biggest or leader in terms of FDI investment from another African country elsewhere in Africa. And UNCTAD have confirmed this, that actually we are amongst the top 3 investors on the continent. We obviously present a unique opportunity for Indonesian men and women, given the abundance of our mineral sector and the expertise of mining, engineering that we have presented elsewhere in the world. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, key opportunities will be to help us to do good on our UNFCCC commitments in relation to climate change, to help us to accelerate the pathway from a carbon-dependent economy to ensure that we decarbonize. There is a just energy transition plan. So we have bankable plans for investors in South Africa. And be it as it may, ladies and gentlemen, we are a unique, attractive FDI investments, given the fact, Thomas, that 180 of the 500 Fortune global companies are having a office within South Africa. That being said, the major and the uniquely different opportunity this time in 2024 is the operationalization of the ACFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, ladies and gentlemen, And through the South African Customs Union, of which South Africa is a leading member, we have completed our tariff offerings, which will mean you invest in South Africa, you invest as a partner of the South African Customs Union, you'll then be able to benefit up to 90% of tariff offerings. So that is our value proposition at this moment. Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Botez. I like that last point there. You're making an advertisement, I think, for South Africa a little bit too, showing it, which is always a very good, to be a booster of your own country is always a very good. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement in particular, these are the sort of regulatory frameworks that could advance efforts for greater trade and greater trade integration. I'm going to turn to my second question here. In your estimation, how can countries of the Global South leverage development cooperation to create a more integrated logistics network, fostering increased trade? Thank you.
Yes, I think firstly, obviously, is through the existing, taking opportunities from the existing bilateral and multilateral agreements. South Africa is a leading figure within the Global South. And we have been able to negotiate bilateral trade agreements, ladies and gentlemen, to streamline customs procedures, reduce tariffs, and enhance trade facilitation. They can also work together within other multilateral frameworks like the South-South Cooperation, the SSC, and regional groups such as the Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA, to establish broad trade and logistics agreements that benefit both countries and their respective regions. Secondly, in relation to infrastructure development opportunities, it is our submission that port development and transport corridors can improve and enhance connectivity. And by investing in the modernization of ports, upgrading of rails, and developing of logistical hubs, countries of the South can enhance their trade routes and their corridors, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, digital integration and technology sharing. The leveraging of digital technologies to improve logistics and supply chain management is crucial. That is crucial for countries of the South, for South Africa, and for Indonesia. And those technologies, ladies and gentlemen, can contribute through the tracking of goods for optimization of routes and e-logistic platforms to streamline operations. Fourthly, Thomas, trade facilitation initiatives, the implementation of joint trade facilitation measures, such as the streamlining of border control mechanisms and coordinated customs procedures can significantly reduce the turnaround time and trade delays deficits, also lowering trade costs. Fifthly, and a very important issue for Africa, South Africa, is the enhancement of public partnerships, PPPs. We do encourage, understand that relationship amongst countries of the South, between South Africa and Indonesia, is primary state-centric. But we have identified through my president the pivotal role of non-state actors such as multinational companies, private capital investors, the different business chambers. And the combination of all these five factors, Thomas, can obviously ensure that as countries of the Global South, we will then become the champions of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Botez. There's a lot of interesting thoughts in there. Just for example, I think digitization is going to come up again and again. It's crucial, it appears, to advance optimization at all sorts of levels, including streamlining processes and procedures, whether it's regulatory or otherwise, to accelerate trade. So I think that's going to be coming up. I'd love to dig deeper into that. But next, I'd like to turn to Mr. Fernandi to get perspectives from the private sector. I'd love to get your views, even on anything that was said so far from the national government perspective. Might be interesting to see your opinion on that. First, I'd like to ask, considering your company's best practices, and you have a lot of experience with it, especially the transformation that you've done recently. Congratulations on that, by the way. How can your company's expertise support logistics connectivity in the Global South? And again, based on your company's experience, what are the primary challenges to logistics performance, whether it's transportation, inventory management, customs clearance, other logistics support? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas. First and foremost, I'd like to explain a bit what we've done in Indonesia. So Pertamina International Shipping, which is part of the national energy company, responsible for the majority of supply chain of energy to Indonesia and across Indonesia, where annually we deliver more than 160 billion ton of any type of energy to all over Indonesia, to all over islands in Indonesia, and easily achieve more than 20,000 shipments in order to deliver all these energies. So in terms of expertise, we know exactly how to deal with the challenges in Indonesia when it comes to supply chain. As part of the energy company, we try as much as we can to implement the best practices as well as the global standard in our operation. But we know exactly in reality on the ground that sometimes it is a challenge for us to achieve these best practices. And so what I can share is how to deal with this gap, how to keep delivering energy to all over to Indonesia despite all the infrastructure challenges and some other factor which far beyond the ideal type of supply chain infrastructure. So to summarize, what kind of expertise that we believe to successfully do our job in delivering energy in Indonesia, there are a few things that I think every organization already understand, but the thing is how to do it in the developing country like Indonesia. First, I think as a company, we focus so much in the master plan and be consistent to the master plan that what we already set. In Pertamina, we know that with the emerging demand and the growing demand in Indonesia, we need to keep developing the infrastructure required for the supply chain of energy, as well as to anticipate the future demand for any kind of energy. And secondly, our ability to monitor the performance of our supply chain is really important, because by doing so, we know exactly how to improve, how to debottleneck all the challenges or inefficiency in our supply chain. And the third one is how to manage safety and security. We know that in some areas the situation is not as developed as we want. So how to deal with this uncertainty is so important. And last but not least is about people. Unlike in the developed country where the technology application is well ahead of Indonesia, people is taking in a very important role in our logistic and supply chain. Earlier of this year, I went to Rotterdam to see the facility there, where the application of technology is amazing, but that's not the case in Indonesia. In Indonesia, people need jobs, so that's why it's so important for us to develop and train people in order to allow us to have a good operation, efficient operation in the supply chain. And a few challenges based on our experience. We know that the infrastructure is not well developed, where the connectivity is one issue, where one infrastructure to the other infrastructure sometimes is not not well integrated. And secondly, a condition where many facilities are quite old and in a poor condition. And the third one is the capacity. Capacity is one issue where I still remember, based on estimation, there are more than 1,000 ports need to build in Indonesia. And the last one will be the compliance to the global standard become a challenge in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fernandi. Logistics connectivity for energy trade. That's something that I'd love to chat with you more about, especially in a challenging environment like an archipelago like Indonesia, and probably different systems, different norms, so to speak. Maybe we could talk about that more later for sure. And when you mentioned you visited Rotterdam, you were looking for new inspiration, new ideas, but it's a very different environment there where they may not have the workers and they need automation. But you mentioned here, people need the jobs. It's like you have the large population in Indonesia. And so there is these dissimilarities that you have to contend with as you look for best practices across the globe. Interesting. There's a second question, and I should be mindful of time. Mr. Fernandi, one more question. How can effective and efficient logistics practices be integrated into operations in developing countries? So it's sort of like the Rotterdam experience. You have effective and efficient logistics elsewhere, but how can you customize it or make it country-specific in a way for a very different region? And also, what are the challenges associated with digitizing logistics processes in these regions? How can they be addressed?
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I think in order to have an efficient and effective logistic, we need to be able to measure and monitor. That's the things that in private sector that some things that so important. Sometimes we link some performance indicator to the logistics performance, where we need to keep improving over the time to make sure that we do the supply chains as efficient as we can. And secondly, to have a supply chain coordination is so important. I mean, what we do in the small in organization, we have a mechanism internally how to coordinate among key players and stakeholders to ensure that we have a good planning, a good operation, and good execution as well. And the third one is to manage the uncertainty. In Indonesia, we know that the natural disaster is happening quite a lot, and have to have a backup system in order to keep doing our job to deliver the energy to Indonesia, despite all these challenges, the geographical challenges as well, is so important. And definitely technology will help us to be much more efficient when it comes to the supply chain and also the monitoring. And definitely for some challenges to implement the technology and supply chain in Indonesia, I believe the awareness to make some changes, to keep improving sometimes is not there. And combined with the culture, where some resistance to make some changes, we feel become a big hurdle sometimes. And secondly, human resource challenge, where yes, when we need to implement new technology, then training and development is required. And plus the cost associated with the new technology sometimes considered too expensive for a developing country like Indonesia, and especially in some rural areas. And plus the support system. When you implement the new technology, then we need to build some support system to allow us to keep maintaining this technology to 100% in operation. Last but not least, definitely regulation and support from the government to allow us to implement such technology in the supply chain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fernandi. So some of the key things you mentioned there about the importance of measuring and monitoring, and sort of just continue building that out. That'll help. You mentioned also uncertainty, like in a country like Indonesia, where there could be disruption because of natural disaster, many factors, and establishing good business continuity plans to figure out how the backup plan, basically, so you don't stop operations. A lot of interesting things there. Also, the incentives, you need to sort of change, the way I read it is you need to change incentives to make changes, whether it's cultural changes or otherwise. So that's having to do with norms and behavior. And then finally, regulatory environment, that always comes up. And it's one of the slowest moving parts of the puzzle. So thank you so much for your intervention. Next, I'd like to turn to Mr. Tan. I'd like to ask you your perspectives as an operator of arguably one of the most well-run seaports in the region, I would say. And I'm going to ask both questions together as per your request, sir. Mr. Tan, what best practices can be drawn from the Singapore experience in improving port efficiency and performance? And how do multi-stakeholder partnerships play a part in that role? And also, from a policy perspective, what strategies should be implemented to effectively integrate human resource management, good governance, technological innovations, and other factors to improve logistics connectivity? Over to you, sir.
Hi, thank you, Thomas. I also like to thank the Indonesia Ministry of National Development Planning and the organizer for inviting me to speak at this high-level forum. I've been asked to share on the two questions. I thought that I take them together because the Singapore story, Singapore experience brings out some of the points for the other question. I shall first preface by saying that the Singapore story is largely based on local circumstances. It may not resonate with everyone. Besides the key success factors that I will talk about, there's also some degree of serendipity. That said, I do hope that you'll find some parts of my sharing useful. Maybe first let me share or set the context. As a small country without natural resources, Singapore relies heavily on trade for our survival. Singapore has been a maritime state since our earliest days in the 13th century. This continued in the 19th and 20th century when Singapore serves as the logistic hub and a trading post, facilitating trade between the East and the West. And it is still the case today. The continued relevance of our maritime logistics would not have been possible without, first, long-term planning, second, adopting an ecosystem approach, and three, investing in our human resources. First up, as you can see on the slide, really about long-term planning. Singapore is known today as a global logistics and trading hub. Did not happen by chance. Instead, achieved through long-term planning. More than 50 years ago, in 1966, Singapore decided to build our very first container terminal. Back then, containerization was not yet a norm. But with the future in mind, and the conviction that containerization was the way to go, the government then decided to make the bold decision of investing significant resources into this endeavor. True enough, the first container ship came in 1972 with just 300 containers. This slowly became 3 million containers in 1972. And by the 1991, it was already 6 million containers. And in 1991, even though we still have excess handling capacity in our port, we decided to expand and build a much bigger terminal in the western part of Singapore, what we call the Pasir Panjang terminal today. We foresaw that we needed to be able to handle 36 million 20-foot equivalent containers to be well set for the future, which was about 6 times the volumes that we were seeing then. 25 years later, in 2016, Singapore handled 34 million containers. proving that this was indeed the right call to make. Even before the Pasir Panjang terminal was fully operationalized, we made another decision in 2012 to start to consolidate our container terminals at a single location in Tuas, which is the most western end of Singapore. At the time we made this call, global container shipping was actually facing a downturn. But with the future in mind, we decided to proceed with our plans. Just last year, Singapore handled a historical high of 30 million containers, 39 million containers, sorry, I beg your pardon. With this port in Tuas to be fully completed in the 2040s, it will have a capacity to handle 65 million containers. Tuas port will be an intelligent, automated, and sustainable port that is prepared and ready to take on our future logistic needs. And Singapore will continue to have in mind this long-term planning spirit and make careful but considered decisions with the future in mind. The second factor that I think I want to talk about really is about adopting an ecosystem approach to the development of our logistics and maritime sector. I think a good, strong system does not exist in isolation from other parts of the economy. Hence, we seek to create a collaborative environment that brings together the government, private enterprises, research institutions, and international partners to share resources, leverage expertise, and spur innovation. I think some panelists also from the morning talk about innovation. Such an ecosystem will promote the creation and adoption of new technologies and solutions, attracting further investment and talent, thereby creating a virtuous cycle that reinforces competitiveness. A program that we roll out, for instance, to match demand drivers with solution providers is our Pier 71 initiative shown on the slide. Pier 71 brings together marine tech startups and investors to facilitate an exchange of ideas and funding opportunities. Pier 71 has nurtured close to 110 startups with the support of 62 corporate partners. To date, the participating startup has raised over 65 million Singapore dollars in investments, surpassing our target of $25 million by 2025. Finally, the third really factor that I think also previous panelists was talking about is investing in human resources. People make up the heart of our system. As an important factor to all our efforts to grow the sector, skilled and motivated individuals drive innovation, operational excellence, and strategic decision making. We make a concerted effort to invest in our human resources and strengthen tripartite partnership fostered between government, industry, and our workers. As the sector transforms with digitalization and the emergence of new green technologies, government, industry, and workers will have to adopt new operating processes and develop new skills to remain relevant. To prepare our workforce for the green transition that's happening across the logistics and maritime sector, we have also launched the Maritime Energy Training Facility, or METF in short, together with 22 other partners, including engine manufacturers, classification societies, trade associations, training service providers, and research institutes. The METF is expected to train over 10,000 personnel by 2030 in the safe handling, familiarization, and operation of zero or near zero emission vessels. These efforts help to develop a resilient, future-ready workforce that can support the growth of the sector. As we hear from the other distinguished panelists, I think the whole is really greater than the sum of the parts. A good and highly connected logistics system in any country creates spillover benefits, not just the whole region, but in my view, really the whole world. It's the fundamental nature of global trade today that relies on many efficient nodes in a highly connected network. Singapore seeks to serve as one such node. Maybe allow me to quickly conclude. Long-term planning, adopting an ecosystem approach, and investing in our human resources have been at the heart of Singapore's story. I hope I have given you a glimpse of our experiences in a short given time, but know that we were not able to do all this without the strong partnership that we share with other governments, the industries, and also workers all over the world. Therefore, the theme for this year's high-level forum is very apt. Strengthening multi-stakeholder partnerships for development will promote transformative change. Thank you. I look forward to having a fruitful discussion later.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tan. I appreciate your intervention. Singapore, I appreciate the qualification at the beginning. You said about how Singapore has local circumstances, you know, in a way that may not be generalizable across all nations, but it may also provide inspiration to other countries. It may be something to generate ideas. And I like the nice tripartite, the three. That's a very typical Singapore way to deliver information, by the way, in case anyone is wondering. The three ideas of very long-term planning, I would say, not just long-term planning, but very long-term. That's a major theme of your remarks. And of course, for other countries, that is a challenge. How to plan long-term is a challenge for many countries. So that's something that maybe there's ways of developing durable systems, durable approaches that aren't easily changed with new administrations as things change politically. The ecosystem approach, in a sense, it's already the partnership domestically. The multi-stakeholder partnership is there at a domestic level. So collaboration across a range of stakeholders. And policy supports that in the Singapore example. So you answered the policy question. Like the METF you mentioned, for example. Anyway, I should move on. Time is precious. Let's see here. I'm going to turn to Mr. Bukvich now, all the way there in the end, to get your views from a development perspective. I'll ask both questions together, as per your request. First, how can multilateral development banks catalyze effective development cooperation, including South-South and triangular cooperation modalities, public-private partnerships, and foreign aid to address infrastructure development gaps and other factors hindering performance in developing countries? And my second question, somewhat related, are what are the best practices and lessons learned by ISDB, by your own circumstance, that can be adopted by other MDBs, other multilateral development banks, to improve logistics connectivity in the region? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. First of all, thank you, Thomas, and for introducing me. And I would like also to thank and congratulate the Directorate of Foreign Policy and International Development Cooperation, Bappenas, for organizing this timely event. And giving a chance to me also to share and interact with you on the insights of Islamic Development Bank's approach to, or our in-house developed South-South triangular cooperation modality. It is, after COVID, we could realize the importance of connectivity and cooperation in the global South. I think to many reasons it's a high time that we should explore possibilities, and as an example of Singapore, having events of this and having long-term planning would really assist us and direct us in the right way. ISDB's commitment to South-South cooperation has been from inception. In Riyadh, we just have celebrated 50 years anniversary of Islamic Development Bank. For you, maybe who are not aware of Islamic Development Bank, we are an MDB in ownership of 57 countries, purely from the South. So we are from the South and doing projects by the South, for the South. And we have done more than 12,000 projects and in value of around $185 billion in supporting South development. We started first with technical cooperation when it comes to technical capacity building, and then in 2012 this evolved into a special modality that was actually developed by Islamic Development Bank, which is the reverse linkage modality, where we for first time opened the possibility of engaging as an MDB directly with the private sector. So the idea is to take a best practice from one place in the South and implement it in another through coordination of Islamic Development Bank, which started first as a grant, but now it developed into a loan-based facility financing infrastructure in this direction. So importance of working with the South, with private sector, I think for all MDBs, we are more than aware that the majority of economies, at least in our structure, are MSMEs and the private sector. So we have to explore ways and means of actually reaching to them and working with them. And we cannot talk about development if we do not have a dimension of a private sector. So private sector is something that gives a very huge boost on when we talk about infrastructure and also connectivity. In addition, the cross-border connectivity in terms of both physical infrastructure and regulatory harmonization is gaining traction in policy practice of promoting regional integration, particularly in our developing countries. So we have hard and soft connectivities, and both of them actually lower trade costs and make international supply chains more efficient. If we look through a historical dimension, in history of, for example, Europe, it is actually that building the extensive railway network in Europe proved to be a critical precedent in the modern history of European integration. Through a European example, which may not be fully replicable in different political economic environments, but it establishes a solid base for studying the role of cross-border connectivity in advancing regional integration in the developing world. Except Europe, we can also look at ASEAN, which was mentioned earlier by our speakers, the connectivity plan of ASEAN, or the Gulf Cooperation Council railway project, or the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PIDA. The common denominator for all these, which I have mentioned, is the cross-border connectivity. And when we talk about cross-border connectivity, we also have to look at the border logistics, which would decrease the transport cost and unlock the potential of interlinked production networks. Besides physical connectivity, simplification of custom or harmonization of customs and trade procedures is as well important, and it was mentioned again by the colleagues before me. In the study made by ESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, the study shows that the paperless implementation of World Trade Facilitation Agreement, electronic exchange of trade data, would reduce cost by 13% in our member countries in Asia. So working and putting emphasis on cross-border connectivity attracts more and more attention. And again, I have been just visiting one of the neighboring countries, and wherever we go, issue after COVID is the food security. Food security and access is, and diversifying trade relations is actually a main agenda of most of our member countries. So MDBs, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and Islamic Development Bank, we are well positioned to support our member countries when it comes to policy advice, technical assistance, and lending operations. So For us, cross-border connectivity is considered to be a priority area of multilateral cooperation international development agenda, and we have established this recently in our Riyadh declaration during the 50-year anniversary of ISDB in 2024. Another example I want to give of a successful infrastructure project, which is really very interesting, is the infrastructure development gap handling. When we look at Senegal, Malaysia, we had a loan-based business-to-government infrastructure, business-to-government. So the private company supporting government in Senegal on building rural roads, 63 kilometers of rural roads in Senegal, building by the technical know-how, by knowledge, and IDB played a facilitation and implementation role in this project. So the rural law, it was very interesting because it showed an example of cooperation across the border between private sector and governments. And also within Senegal, union of private sectors were around the Malaysian company called ProBase. So the local Senegalese, they worked with Malaysian private company, and they developed a good example whereby the project had a ratio of 1 to 20 when it comes to a ratio of Malaysian to Senegalese workers. So they kept a balance with the local community as well. Now we are working on the extension of this project to additional 100 kilometers of rural projects. So when it comes to the private sector, MDBs need really to act as a catalyst and to gather them around. There was a study recently published that all MDB finance would be less than 10% of finance overall. So we really need to work very, very hard to connect our member countries and a private sector in our member countries. So for our Global South engagement through reverse linkage, we have an increasing interest among the private sector, and which would be the future, I think, for all of us. We have to work in partnerships together, because the challenge of development, especially in our member countries, where we have 31 out of 57 are fragile countries, 29 are classified as LDMCs. We really have to explore possibilities of reaching the market, and ISDB has been active in this. We have also been establishing banks on ground, which is a unique exercise, I think, when it comes to MDBs, just to be closer. And of course, we have been working through MCPS, member country partnership strategy, which each of our governments in exploring possibilities of joint cooperation. So ISDB does not work unless in coordination with the local governments where it works. So that is another characteristic of ISDB, being a purely DNA of a South-South institution. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bukvic. A few things you mentioned there, how, like off the top there, the vital importance for MDBs to include the private sector in their work, basically. And so that's something that's essential. You mentioned that example in Senegal, where the private sector was actually helping government to build roads, which is not usually the case. And it's an example of bringing the private sector in more and more, how it could be helpful. The common theme that comes up, cross-border connectivity, harmonization of customs, for example, the paperless processing of trade, bringing cost savings, as well as accelerating the process for greater timeliness of goods transport. Very good ideas. Now I'm going to turn to our final panelist, Ms. Lakatos. So I'm looking for another multilateral bank perspective, and I'll ask each question in turn, and you could answer it one at a time. Ms. Lakatos, in your estimation, what key insights have been drawn from the latest Logistic Performance Index report? I mentioned it at the top of the session, but what insights can be drawn from that report on the common challenges faced by Global South in improving logistics performance? And how can these common challenges be addressed through policy reforms? So I'd like to talk more about policy. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Thomas. And it's great to be here. And to our hosts from Bappenas, just wanted to say sincere thanks for the kind invitation to be at this forum, as well as to be part of this great discussion. So jumping straight in, let me start with the headliner, I guess related very much to the findings of the Logistics Performance Index report. So our latest edition shows that, that's the good news, that logistics performance has been broadly resilient even after these 3 years of unprecedented supply chain disruptions that have been induced by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the 2023 results also show that there is indeed somewhat of a noticeable and persistent gap between the logistics performance of high-income and low-income countries. So you mentioned, Thomas, at the beginning, you know, out of the top 33 best performers, 30 are high-income countries. And congratulations to Singapore for coming out the very first on the Logistics Performance Index. But that being said, I think what the results also show is that logistics performance transcends income. And it's really associated to many, many different factors, whether that's policies, government policies, private sector development, or other aspects. I think I will touch upon these in my intervention later. So to get to your question, Thomas, what are the lessons that we have learned from this report and what are the policy implications? Let me just quickly highlight 3 main lessons and some of the relevant policies. The very first one was that countries that perform well on the aggregate index also perform well on the sub-indices, on the subcomponents of this logistics performance index. That is to say, logistics performance as measured by the efficiency of customs and clearance processes, by the quality of trade and transport infrastructure, the ease of arranging international shipments, the competence and quality of logistics service providers, the ability to track and trace, but also in terms of timeliness. So let me give you a couple of specific examples in terms of this, how this broad-based good performance on all of these sub-indicators has helped some of the developing countries outperform their developed country peers. And here, I wanted to highlight South Africa. What we see is that on the 2023 index is actually outperforming the United Kingdom, while the other example of such broad-based performance boosting overall logistics performance was the one of Malaysia that has actually outperformed New Zealand. So these are the kind of positive examples that we see in terms of how policies that are broad-based contribute to boosting overall logistics performance. Now, the takeaway from this is that policies would need to focus across the board, right? Not just one area, but across all these areas of logistics performance. So investing in physical infrastructure, for instance, would not yield the intended benefits without investing in logistics service provider capacity in many of our countries. Now, moving on to our second takeaway, is that in terms of the lowest performers on the LPI index, it is in fact customs and infrastructure improving performance on these indices that would matter more for boosting overall performance. And that is because the lowest performing countries tend to have really weak performance in terms of customs and border agencies, but also the quality of trade and transport-related infrastructure, which in turn are translating into long delays on the ground. The lowest ranking countries are low income. They are insulated most of the time. They are landlocked and often beset by conflict. So this takes me to our last highlight from the report would be that addressing bottlenecks in some of these landlocked developing countries that are in fact affecting the whole logistics system across the world would take much more than just unilateral policy interventions, and they would need to target multilateral, high-level coordinated policy interventions across borders, for instance, through the introduction of robust transit regimes. Yeah, so I just wanted to conclude by saying, I guess, on this question, Thomas, that the measuring and tracking logistics performance is evolving, and the World Bank is this year going to publish the 2024 Logistics Performance Index, which is moving away from the traditional survey-based approach, and is going to be using big data to come up with a new LPI index and come closer to objective information to tracking logistics performance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lakatos. I'd like to follow up one last question here. Could you please provide some examples of successful implementations where the World Bank's toolkits and data sets have significantly improved a country's trade logistics performance or customs and border management? So it's about the World Bank's, their approach and how they could help. Over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, so I noticed from all the esteemed panel members, there's been a lot said about the importance of measuring, tracking, and actually assessing the impact of some of the policy reforms that are being implemented. So I think this is where some of the World Bank toolkits and data sets come in order to support our evidence-based approach, whether that's research, analysis, or policy dialogue with our client countries. So specifically on the LPI, I think we use it often in combination with other data sets, whether that is time release studies or container port performance, trade policy measures, doing business indicators, which nowadays is called Be Ready. So the LPI and some of these broader tools have really been a fantastic tool in supporting our engagement with the countries. And before actually big data gained such prominence, I think it's been a really useful tool to monitor performance, to allow for benchmarking, for cross-country comparisons. And actually what we see is that it translated into reforms on the ground in many of our countries. It has created awareness and it stimulated the dialogue, whether that's within the government or public-private, to result to some of these measures. Now, in terms of specific examples, since we are in beautiful Bali, I wanted to highlight Indonesia and our work on logistics as an example of success stories in terms of improving logistics performance. So I guess going back without spending too much time in the details, what we see is logistics performance has been gaining high visibility on both the government agenda, but also on the agenda of many private sector players. So starting in 2012, the government has introduced, this is relating to the planning and strategic thinking, the blueprint for development of national logistics, the so-called SISNOGNAS, and digitalization was a huge part of this initiative. Now, the other initiative, flagship initiative that I wanted to highlight was in 2022, the so-called national logistics ecosystem, the ecosystem approach to improving logistics performance, which was meant to improve and streamline processes, digitize some of these processes, and to serve as an end-to-end digital portal that is connecting from the beginning until the end all of the players. So here's where the World Bank Logistics Performance Index comes in. And that came in the form of, the government planning strategy. So the government has been actually using the LPI as one of their key performance indicators that has been built into their long-term strategy documents, RPGMN, many of you may recognize, targeting the improvement on the logistics performance index. And then targeting specifically reductions in logistics costs as % of GDP. So what our analysis shows actually that these reforms has been translating into great outcomes on the ground. The big data that we have used in the 2023 LPI report shows many great highlights in terms of performance. So ship turnaround time in Indonesia has declined to about 2 days, somewhat higher than ASEAN comparators, but very good performance. Import-export dwell time at around 3 days overall. I think Indonesia performs well on all of those. And I guess lots to be done yet, but more data, better data targeting macro, meso, micro angles to measuring logistics performance. We are working with the government on developing some of these systems.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lakatos. Sorry to rush you along. Unfortunately, we will not have a Q&A session today. We went a little over time, which is so often the case in these sorts of dialogues on these very wide-ranging and complex issues. We have more to discuss, but limited time. But let's may this conversation help spur new connections, new ideas, new thoughts, diffusion of knowledge for the benefit of everyone here in the room and for all those who may be viewing it at a later date. I would just like to encourage all the audience members to feel free to approach our panelists, since we didn't have the Q&A, during the break, perhaps, to exchange details, continue the conversation and the learning. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their insights and helping spread the knowledge on best practices and other ideas to improve logistics connectivity. I'd like to thank Indonesia's Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, for organizing this important event. Terima kasih. And finally, I'd like to thank the audience for your kind attention. I now call this session to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator and all panelists, for the very insightful discussion. You may return to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will have a short break and we'll start the fourth session with the theme Rising Sea Level, Strategic Responses for Sustainable Development at 3:30 p.m. Thank you.